views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
All right, coming up on this edition of Today's Verdict, with so many of our viewers asking for help when maneuvering through criminal court, we thought we should have an expert on set to help you navigate a criminal case. We will sit down with an attorney who can give us some much needed guidance. And just in case one criminal expert is not enough for you, we have another on set to discuss all you need to know about obtaining the required discovery while your criminal case sits on the calendar. Next, closing down your business is not as simple as cleaning out your office desk. There are requirements that must be met before a dissolution is allowed. Tonight, we give you the scoop. As you can see, we have much to get to, so stay tuned. Today's Verdict starts right now. All right, hello and welcome to Today's Verdict, the live and interactive show that gives you your legal rights and options. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesh. Well, Today's Verdict is always encouraging you to stay connected. Make sure to tweet us at Today's Verdict and hashtag Ask Today's Verdict if you have a question. Also, make sure to like us and follow us at Facebook at Today's Verdict and check us out at BronxNet.tv. All right, well, getting arrested can be a very daunting experience, and there are several phases that follow the arrest. The process may seem frightening, but as we like to say on Today's Verdict, knowledge is power. So joining us today is criminal defense attorney Michael Rubin. Michael, thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure. Good afternoon.
All right, so Michael, sometimes the first time anyone has any issue with the police is when they're actually being arrested, and that's on, say, a sidewalk of New York. Tell me, what happens when you're approached by an officer and the officer starts asking you some information, and at this point you're getting arrested? What usually transpires?
Well, typically there'll be some communication between the officer and the person before the actual arrest takes place. Typically the officer will approach the individual and maybe ask for identification, which you have an obligation to provide.
And what kind of, you mean let's say a driver's license, that type of identification?
In that situation, well, if they're driving, they may ask for a driver's license. If you're not a driver, you may have a non-driver's ID or some other form of ID.
Voter's ID or something else.
Something like that.
All right. Now, and do you have to give that over?
Yes, you do.
You do.
Yes,
Okay.
you do.
Well, now it goes a little bit farther, and they're asking you for some very specific information as to what you were doing, why you were in front of this particular store, maybe why your hands were in a pocket they shouldn't have been. What do you do now as that person who are asking those questions?
Well, the practical reality is different from the legal obligation of a police officer. So you have no obligation to answer questions from a police officer beyond your name, your address, your date of birth, things of that nature. We call it pedigree information.
All right. Now, do they have to, at this point, because everyone's used to television, do they have to read you your rights, tell you what you can or cannot say? What do they what does a police officer have to do at this point, if anything?
So I often get the question, Mr. Rubin, my son was arrested or I was arrested and the police never read me my Miranda warnings. Miranda warnings are not required in every case. They're only required to be read by a police officer under a circumstance where there are two situations present. Number one, are you actually in custody, meaning you're not free to leave? You don't need to have been read the magic words, you're under arrest, but you cannot leave. And the other is that you're actually being interrogated. You're being asked a question. So you could be in custody and blurt out an incriminating statement. The police would not have to have given you your Miranda warnings for that to be used against you.
All right, so let's go a little farther. Now the police officer says, I don't like your answer. I don't like the way you're talking to me, or I don't really believe you. Please turn around and put your hands behind your head, and they start to cuff you. Now you're arrested.
Right.
Okay, what happens next?
You're going to get taken to the police station. You're not talking yourself out of an arrest at that point. I always tell my clients or potential clients that you should cooperate with the police, but you have no obligation to answer their questions. Tell them that you have an attorney, and have them call me.
All right. Now, is that particular person taken to a precinct? Are they taken to a booking? What happens? Because a lot of times moms of the child doesn't really know where to even find their child. The child will send a text or be able to call and say, I've been arrested. Well, where do you find them?
Well, that's a good question. So the typical scenario involves a uniformed police officer arresting a person on the street. They're placed in the back of the patrol car, and they're taken back to that police officer's local precinct. They're checked into a desk officer. The desk officer will ask some basic questions, and a logbook will be completed with various information relative to the individual being arrested. And then you'll spend some time being, quote unquote, processed in the precinct until your fingerprints come back from Albany, they call it, but who knows where the computer database is now.
Now, how do you find, usually at this point, how do you find out about the client? Is it through somebody, I mean, obviously, can the client call you directly when they're in the custody of the NYPD? Does a family member call you? How do you end up getting involved at this point?
Every way imaginable. I get calls from the precinct, from the individual, the potential client. Maybe they're a new client, maybe they're an old client. I get phone calls from family very often. Oftentimes it's the girlfriend.
Okay.
My boyfriend just got arrested. But typically it's a family member who will reach out to me and get me involved.
All right. And what do you do next? Like, what's the next? I don't think the viewers really know what the attorney does at this point. What do you do once you get that call?
Well, let's assume I've been properly, quote unquote, retained by the family.
Right.
I'll call the precinct. I will pick up the phone. I will call the precinct. And if it's a felony case and a detective is involved, I'll speak to the detective.
Well,
and I find that 99.9% of the detectives in the NYPD are professional and respectful and will speak to an attorney on a professional level. I let them know that Mr. Smith has an attorney. I'm his attorney. Please don't question him about the case. Please let me know when you have an arrest ID number. That helps me track the case through the system.
Sure.
And then I can follow the individual through to arraignments.
and it's nice that if you have a relationship also, I would assume,
Absolutely.
with either a prosecutor or somebody in the past, and it's important. Am I correct?
You are, and I will let them know that I'm a former assistant DA. If it's an arrest in here in the Bronx, I'll let them know that I used to work in the Bronx DA's office. I know a lot of the judges and a lot of the prosecutors. And I always make clear to them and to the potential clients that they understand that nothing improper is intended by that, but I can pick up the phone and people will take my call.
There's a certain amount of respect.
Right.
All right. Now, we had talked a little bit on set about thinking you're going to be arrested or having a feeling that you're going to be arrested, yet you're not arrested. Tell the viewers what you meant by that, really.
Well, there's nothing that I can do to prevent an arrest generally. I have been able to do that sometimes. But the typical phone call is, I had an argument with my spouse or some other scenario. I think the police may be looking for me. What do I do? So I ask them a few questions. Have the police contacted you? No, but I think they might. I calm everybody down and make sure they understand, look, we go back to what we said earlier. You have no obligation to speak to the police. Give them your name and address, your date of birth, and have them call me. But do not discuss the facts of the case under any circumstances.
Okay. Now, some tips, because we don't have that much time, but somebody's watching for the first time, and you want to give them the best tips you can with respect to that criminal process to protect themselves so it can't be used against them later on or something else. What would you tell somebody watching?
The old saying, and I got this from a salty detective who I work with as a private investigator now, said to me, the old adage is that you can never talk yourself out of getting arrested, but you can sure talk yourself into getting arrested. Keep your mouth closed. The police will tell you some things. They'll make you think you're going to get sent home if you just tell me what happened. Just don't discuss
And
the
Michael,
case.
most importantly, where do we find you?
I can be found at my website, which is kellyrubin.com. My office telephone number, 212-691-9393. And I'm located at 40 Wall Street in the Financial District in Manhattan.
Good stuff. And you'll come back.
Absolutely. Thank you very
don't
much
move
for having
anywhere.
me.
Okay, because we have to take a quick break, but don't worry. We'll be back with more Today's Verdict right after this.
Thomas, you've got prediabetes. But with more exercise and a change in diet, it can be reversed.
I've tried exercising. It just makes me hungry for bacon.
I love bacon, too. And who really likes to exercise?
Not me.
Me neither.
Nobody. So we're good?
What? Oh, you still have prediabetes. Big time.
For all the papas out there, Let's stop what we're doing and take a moment. A moment to be with our kids. They can be loud moments, goofy moments, sporty moments, dorky moments, kooky moments. Moments where we talk or walk or just hang out. It doesn't really matter. They all count because every time dads take a moment to be with their kids, well, it's pretty momentous. So let's all take a moment to make a moment today.
Welcome back to Today's Verdict. I'm your host, David Lesh. We are always encouraging you to stay connected. Tweet us at Today's Verdict. If you've decided to close down your business in response to a financial hardship, to retire, or for any other reason, it's very important that you comply with all aspects of the law. Well, attorney Robert Michelson is here to help you get started. Now, Michael, as somebody who himself has a family business, so I understand how it's important to incorporate and make sure the running of the business is done properly. At some point, all businesses, or many businesses, have to wind up. Any thoughts from the onset of how many businesses, or the life of a business, how long they even last?
Well, small businesses in particular have a limited lifespan. Sometimes they're handed down from generation to generation. The critical time for most small businesses is in the first year or two. There's a lot of startup costs, a lot of expenses and bank loans, and maybe there wasn't a market for the product or service, and that's when you're going to see the majority of the failures.
Well, I think, Robert, what ends up happening is I think many people who have a business, I don't even think they see the end coming. I think all of a sudden maybe the profits are down and there's an issue. When's the first time that you really realize, I'm going to have to wind this thing down? And what usually is a cause for a business to start to disintegrate is my first question, really.
That's a bit of a complicated question, an
Okay.
excellent question, because the reasons why a business fails run a spectrum. Sometimes it's mismanagement. Sometimes you have the wrong product or service. It may be a very good product or service, but it just doesn't match what the marketplace is looking for. So there's really no single reason why a business will fail. One of the things I've noticed is that most business owners, small business owners, don't recognize that they're in trouble until it's too late, that they are in denial. So the first thing you've got to do is be honest with yourself as you look at your financial situation from year to year. And you should really be sitting down with your accountant and going over your profit and loss, looking at what your costs are, seeing if maybe your costs can be reduced, checking to make sure that you're doing the right things to promote your business. If after all those things are taken care of and you're still not able to make a profit or a significant profit, maybe you're even running at a loss, then you have to begin thinking about closing the business, and that can be a very difficult situation.
And how do you have a conversation with your partners? Do you just send a letter? Are you mandated to have a conversation? How do you even do that?
Well, you may be mandated to have a conversation. That really depends on the form of your business. If you are a sole proprietorship, meaning an individual who's just running a business, you just talk to yourself, of course.
Right.
If you have a corporation and there are other shareholders, if you have what we call a limited liability company, which is a type of corporation, or if you have a partnership, which is another type of legal entity, you have to confer and make a decision with the other shareholders and your partners. When the corporation was formed, when the partnership was formed, there was a document that set out what the obligations of the partners are, and you have to abide by that in order to make a decision about what happens to the business.
Now, let's say the average Bronxite or somebody in Manhattan, let's say they have a store, a bodega, and there are debts, and you want to wind up your business, but you realize, wait a second, we owe this vendor money, or we haven't completely paid for our refrigerator or something else. Who owes this money? Well, what happens when you dissolve?
Well, the money is owed by the corporation if you're a corporation. If you're not a corporation, then it becomes a personal liability. So it's very important to know what the form of the business is. If you come to a lawyer, that's the first question the lawyer is going to ask.
What is your business?
Exactly. What is your business? There's a number of questions that would be asked, but the first question is, what's the form of your business?
Is one more complicated than the other to dissolve? I understand the sole proprietorship, it's your own business, but is it tougher to wind down an LLC as opposed to a PC, as opposed to just a general partnership? Are there tougher businesses to dissolve?
Not really. There are some things that have to be done in order to wind up a partnership or a limited liability company or a general C corporation, as we call them. But the basic concept remains the same. And the first thing you want to do, if you've decided in consultation with your accountant generally that you can no longer remain in business, is you want to find out who you owe money to and who owes money to you. You want to know exactly what the state of affairs is. If people owe you money, you want to be able to collect that money before you go out of business.
Okay, let's talk taxes.
Yes,
All
very
right?
important.
Let's talk taxes. You're a business and you owe the IRS, or you owe the New York City Department of Finance. Whomever it is you owe, are you responsible for that personally? Is the business responsible? How does it work?
If you're a corporation, your income taxes, and really it depends, the taxation depends on the form of the business. But most small businesses tend to be either partnerships or limited liability companies, which means that for the most part, the tax obligation is a personal tax obligation as opposed to a large corporation where it's a corporate responsibility. So you want to make sure that the taxes are paid because frequently it's going to be a personal liability. Now, separate and apart from that, there are certain types of taxes which are personal to officers of a company, directors of a company, even if they're not personally responsible for other taxes, such as payroll taxes. That becomes a personal responsibility, and it's a bit of a complicated explanation as to who and who isn't, but it's something you have to be aware of.
Okay, we don't have too much time left, so this is important. Where do we find you? Because there are many businesses going to contact you if they have to dissolve. Where do we find you?
Okay, I'm located in Manhattan.
All right.
The name of my firm is Rich Michelson Magaluf.
Okay.
We're located at 335 Madison Avenue in Manhattan, of course. And my number is 646-453-7853.
Okay. One last thing.
Certainly.
Give me your best tip you can give to somebody who wants to dissolve a business.
Don't wait too long.
All right.
I think you should consult a lawyer and an accountant
Do it
as soon as
quickly.
you feel that there's going to be a problem.
Robert, thanks so much. Don't move. All right. We have to take a quick break, but don't worry. We'll be back with more Today's Verdict right after this.
Music is a bridge between the material and the spiritual. As a blind person, you have to be aware that nobody can tell you what you can or can't do. You really have to try things. My wife, who was also blind, was a good cook. When she died, that's when I started Meals on Wheels. My name is Harvey Lauer. America, let's do lunch.
Drop off a hot meal and say hello. Volunteer by donating your lunch break at americaletsdolunch.org.
They'll test you. Try to break your will. But however loud the loudness gets, however many cheese puffs may fly, you're the driver, the one in control. Stand firm. Just wait. And move only when you hear the click that says they're buckled in for the drive. Never give up till they buckle up.
Welcome back to Today's Verdict. I'm your host, David Lesh. We are always encouraging you to stay connected, so tweet us at Today's Verdict. Discovery is a pre-trial process that occurs during a lawsuit. Basically, it allows a party to access evidence from other evidence and making sure to decide what is good for your trial and what is not good for your trial. The problem is, when can you get the evidence? And right now, here to help us discuss and whether or not we're going to make some progress is Vinu Varghese. Hi, Vinu. How are you?
Good, David. How are you?
All right. Well, from what I understand, and I am not a criminal attorney, and we had somebody on set earlier, getting the evidence that you need to help you as a defendant is not as easy as you would think. Am I correct?
Correct.
Presently, if I've been arrested, what is the procedure for me to get all the evidence I need to help build a defense?
It depends, in some extent, on which county you get arrested in, right? So here in the Bronx, there is some form of open file discovery. So what that means for the viewer is that your lawyer is not going to get everything. So the most important stuff for a defense attorney to be able to analyze is witness statements, right? Because under the law, as it is, the government has to turn over hard evidence. So they have to turn over videotapes. If there's, you're caught doing whatever on video, they're supposed to turn that over pretty quickly, fairly quickly, once requested.
Which, by the way, I hear doesn't happen so often.
Right.
It could take 30, 60, 90 days, and by the time it comes, you've already copped your plea, but we'll get into that, right?
Yes.
Am I correct, though? Sometimes you don't even get the hard evidence so fast.
That's correct, and there's a really sad story out here in the Bronx of a guy named Aaron Cedrus, who was chronicled in the New York Times several months back, because in that case, he was a bouncer outside a club here in the Bronx who was charged with being involved in a gang assault. Guy had no record.
Yeah, I think I've read about this. This is the gentleman who was really just breaking up a fight.
Correct.
And the video would have actually exonerated him, but by the time it got turned over, he spent time in prison. His whole life just kind of fell apart, and he did nothing wrong. Had they turned over this evidence, it would have been
that's
a whole different life.
That's correct, and in fact, that's the problem here, right? The prosecutors here, in this case in the Bronx, it happens in the other counties, they didn't look at this carefully. They didn't look at it closely, and I'm not sure if it was necessarily malicious as it was laziness. I want to use a stronger word, laziness. And this poor guy had to suffer.
Now, let's play devil's advocate for a second, if I may.
Sure.
The reason why I guess the prosecutors do not want to turn over this evidence, you witnesses, etc., is that they're afraid that you, the accused, will contact the witnesses through various means, and we know social media is so prevalent, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, to shame you into not testifying, and now the prosecutor doesn't have anybody to testify against you. What do you say to that?
That doesn't happen.
Doesn't happen.
Can it happen? Sure. But the Brooklyn district attorney, for example, Eric Gonzalez, he has gone on record and saying that most acts of violence, that's really at the heart of the concern, is witness safety, witness intimidation, occur with people that already know each other. So they already know who the person is that went to the police. In most other cases, that's not going to be the issue. And it's certainly not an issue when you're dealing with white-collar crime, when you're dealing with people in financial cases. And as a defense lawyer, I have a right to contact those witnesses. I've got a right to speak to them. I've got a right to have my investigator talk to them, or else I'm not doing my job.
So then why? Why do they not want to turn that over? Certainly in the civil field, which I'm in, you get this very quickly. What is their argument?
David, that's actually, you just hit it on the head. And it's in the civil world, when money's at stake, you get everything. And you don't go to trial, there are no surprises before you'll know what the other side has, get depositions. On the criminal side, you don't get that. Why? What's really what this is all about? Conviction rates.
Please.
They want to keep the conviction rates high, and that's not what a prosecutor's supposed to be doing.
Now, from what I understand, and I've been reading a little bit about this, is that sometimes the defendants say, you know what, I'd rather just get the criminal, part past me, I'll start the time, I'll get it done, I'll be home in a year or two, and I've had it. Even though I didn't really do anything, or I could probably beat this, I don't want to sit in Rikers for another 6 months, or whatever the issue is.
Right.
Is that something that you see happens more often than not?
It absolutely happens to people who are looking at this from a cost-benefit analysis. Okay, you know what? I'm in jail, this is what I'm looking at, they're giving me an offer where I could be out in 6 months or whatever. And people, please, as a defense lawyer, we have an ethical obligation to make sure that no client is perjuring himself, so that they're out there and that they're actually swearing to something they did. But the reality is, particularly with public defenders and the mass majority of people that do that, it's turnstile justice.
Now, you seem to be suggesting there's an inconsistency among counties. Why is that? We have tougher prosecutors in one county, we have more crime, and in one county, why the discrepancy? I don't understand.
All of the counties, with the exception of Manhattan, have some form of open file discovery. Brooklyn has the most liberal. They was the first, my former boss, I was an assistant district attorney in Brooklyn, my former boss, Charles Hines, was the first one to institute that. The other counties, with the exception of Manhattan, follow that procedure.
Why Manhattan?
It's again, got to keep the conviction rates high. Right? To me, you're not dealing with people that are at equal length. Now, some prosecutors, individual prosecutors in Manhattan, will be more, they'll turn it over. But it should be a policy. And Governor Cuomo is actually trying to enact new policy that would make prosecutors turn over things within 15
Now, where
days.
are we in terms of a bill or a law changing this whole discovery process?
Governor Cuomo has said, and he wrote an editorial in the New York Times last week saying that he's going to submit a bill that's going to require prosecutors turn over discovery in most cases, but it's also giving a prosecutor out. Discovery, meaning not the hard evidence like a video, that's already required as long as the defense attorney makes the request, but the witness statements. But they're giving an out, which is the redaction out that says, well, if we think somebody's going to be, threatened.
So you know half it's going to be redacted is really what you're saying.
That's correct.
So what do? You bring an in-camera inspection, you go through it, and
That's the suggestion. The New York State Defenders Association and people like that are actually trying to brush back against
And just for
that.
the viewers, we understand redaction means that they exit out, so you can't really see what's there.
Right.
And then in-camera means the judge has to actually allow them to white it to allow you to see what was been blacked out. So these takes time.
It does.
And somebody may plead out because they just don't want to deal with it.
Well, Governor Cuomo has also proposed eliminating cash bail for misdemeanors and nonviolent felonies. So this is a step in the right
All right,
direction.
so we're moving in the right way. I don't know if you could really give us tips here because it's not really a tip kind of segment, but if somebody is watching it right now and they've been arrested and they have an attorney, but they don't think they're getting the names of the people that can, somehow get them off the hook, what would you tell someone who's watching right now? What could they do?
What they should do is make sure that they review everything. So
Before they plead?
Correct.
All right.
Absolutely. So when the attorney gets it, that the attorney sit down with you and tell you, okay, this is what the government has turned over, this is what they're supposed to turn over, and this is what's missing.
Gotcha.
And the more interaction you have with a client, the better the attorney's going to be.
All right, where do we find you?
My office is at 2 Wall Street down in the Financial District. Our website is vargheslaw.com,
I see we got it up there.
VARGH.
That's
Oh,
awesome.
perfect.
All right.
vargheslaw.com.
All right, and you'll come back maybe in 6 months. We'll see how this is faring out and whether or not we're finally getting some justice.
Sounds good.
All right,
Thank you.
well, that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us and, of course, you, the viewers, for watching. If you missed any part of today's show, be sure to check it out at www.tv. Also, remember, if there's a legal issue or topic you'd like to see on a future edition of Today's Verdict, feel free to contact me at davidlash@bronxnet.org or tweet us at Today's Verdict and make sure to hashtag Today's Verdict. For myself and all of us at Today's Verdict, always remember, know your rights, know your issues, reach a verdict. I'll see you next time.